anybody heard of Gatsby? There we go. We got a book. All right. So this is good because this is an introduction to Gatsby. It's meant to be for people who haven't heard of it. So it sounds like that's where we're at, which is great. So already said, I work at Windsor Circle. I write a lot of JavaScript. I also blog at McCormick.org. And since last fall, that blog has been run on Gatsby. So Gatsby is a static site generator built with React, Webpack, and GraphQL. So that's a lot of buzzwords, and I'm going to spend the rest of this talk unpacking that. Gatsby's been around for about a year, but it just recently this month released a 1.0 release that was a significant rewrite based on what they had learned over the past year or two building it. And it was originally built by a single guy in San Francisco who kind of took time off from consulting to really throw himself into this and another open source project, but now has significant contributors. So what is Gatsby for? It's for building extremely fast websites, especially when the content on those websites is relatively static. So I build a blog with it. Other people have built more marketing type sites. I know there are people investigating using it for e-commerce, and it can be used for a web app, probably in the case where you're combining maybe some more static content with some app-like features. So I said I was going to unpack those buzzwords. And the first one mentioned there was static site generator. So who here has used or know what a static site generator is? Something? Okay, we got a bigger audience here. So a static site generator is just a CLI usually for building a website where you take code, you take templates, you take data just like you would for a normal website, and instead of waiting until a user has made a request to build all of that up, running the code at build time to generate HTML. And so it's going to be based on a mix of data files. Likely, Markdown is very popular here. Most of the popular static site generators end up using Markdown, but it can be JSON, it can be CSVs, it can be image files, it can be really whatever. So Jekyll and Hugo are popular ones. Right now, Gatsby is becoming popular. And this slide ended up out of order, so I'm just going to skip on ahead. This is a list of popular static site generators. That's from a site staticgen.com that maintains a list of the different ones out there. Jekyll is the most popular because it is kind of the blessed GitHub solution. So if you have ever gone to a open source repository on GitHub and seen that they also had a nice website marketing it, there's a pretty good chance that website was built with Jekyll because GitHub provides some nice things for making that easy. And Jekyll is Ruby based. A bunch of these other ones are JavaScript based, including Gatsby. But I think there's a Go. Yeah, Hexo is a Go one. So whatever flavor of code that you like to write, there's probably something there for you. So continuing on with static site generators, just to explain how this is different, I think it's nice to compare it to WordPress or other CMSs. With WordPress, when you're setting it up, you start up a web server. You have WordPress sitting on a server with a database, similar setup to what we just saw with the Go containers possibly, and nothing is happening. When a user makes a request, the web server receives the request, passes it on to WordPress. WordPress takes data from the database, it takes a template, it matches those together and returns HTML. With a static site generator, right at the beginning, whenever you're building the site, and that can be a one-time thing if you don't update it, or it could be something that happens every night based on any data that's updated, or it could be something that you do one-off when the data updates. But when it's built, you take, at that point, all of the data that you have, you take the code that you've written, and you take any templates, or in Gatsby's case, React components, and you match them up and generate some HTML from them. Then that HTML goes and sits on a server, and that can be something like GitHub Pages, that can be Amazon S3, or it can be like a cheap, low-rent, shared internet hosting service. It really can be anything that can serve static pages. You can put these up, and when the user makes a request, it hits the web server and just returns the static page with no code running on the server. So this is the Gatsby version of that. This is just from their website. It's prettier than what I did, so I thought I'd toss that up there. This is specific to them because Gatsby has a real emphasis on you can take all different data sources, and then you have a common data layer with GraphQL, which I'll get into in a second. It uses React, and then it generates HTML, which can go to, again, a bunch of different services. So, benefits of static site generator. Why would you want to use a static site generator in general? The sites that you create with static site generators tend to be fast to load because, again, you're not running code at request time. You're simply picking up an HTML page, and those should be reliably cacheable. The whole model ends up being simpler, especially when you're thinking about security. There is no database that somebody can get access to. Or if there is a database, it's not exposed to the web. You just hit it when you initially generated it. So especially for something like a blog, which doesn't need to really have a database exposed to the internet, this is much simpler. And it's cheap to run. So my blog, I don't pay for hosting on it. I just put it on GitHub, and they will host it for free because the code for it is open source up to a very large amount of traffic that I'm very likely to never hit. And even if it did become super popular, it stays very cheap to just host static files. So that's with static content. With dynamic content, you get the first load faster, and for sites where it makes sense to have a fallback to plain HTML, which isn't everything. If you have a highly dynamic, interactive application, you might not be able to do anything with plain HTML, but in cases where you can have something for plain HTML, you get that for free, basically. And that's especially true if the static site generator is based on JavaScript, because you can share the same code back end and front end, and basically as you upgrade the front end, you're getting all of that in HTML form for free to start. So that was buzzword number one. Second one is React. How many people have used React? Okay, we're getting to a bigger crowd. How many people have heard of React? All right, that's a much bigger crowd. So I won't spend too much time here because this is not a talk on React, but React is a JavaScript framework. It was created by Facebook. The big thing that is nice and important about it is that it has a component-based workflow, a model for sharing code, with a special emphasis on reusable components. And there's a very large ecosystem around it at this point. Pretty much anything that you want to do on a website, somebody's built a React component to do that thing. And finally, the way it's written is easier than some other models to generate an HTML version on the server and then reattach to that on the client. So third buzzword is Webpack. This is also not a talk on Webpack. The nice thing about this is all four of the things that are buzzwords here could get their own conferences, maybe. And I'm not going that deep. But what's important to note here is that Webpack is a code bundling tool. So it takes all of your assets, your JavaScript, your HTML, your CSS, and bundles them in and helps you load them. And specifically, it supports code splitting, so that if you are reusing a bunch of code in different places, but then you also have one-off pieces of code that run only on different pages, Webpack makes it easy to split that up into smart bundles so that you can only load the pieces of code that you need for a specific page. And it has also, it's kind of piggybacked with React, and they've become fairly popular together. And so it has plugins and such for handling pretty much anything that you want to do. And that's again from Webpack site, just that's how they see themselves. They take all of this stuff and they output simple things that can run in the browser. Fourth buzzword, GraphQL. So I'm going to guess, great show of hands for you've used GraphQL. I saw you give a talk on it, so I know you have. Yeah, so this is newer and less widespread. GraphQL is a query language developed by Facebook to solve a specific problem, the problem of when you're making API requests, being able to easily get just the data that you need, and without having to make a ton of extra requests, as can happen with REST APIs now. I think of it as a more limited version of maybe SQL, like a database query language. It doesn't do nearly as much, but it lets you express, this is the data that I want, and only the data that I want. And it has nice tools around it. It comes with a built-in IDE-like setup, which I'll show in a second, to help you build your queries. And it's getting more popular. GitHub and Shopify both have GraphQL APIs. I actually saw today that the New York Times, the next version of their site, is being built using GraphQL. So a GraphQL query looks something like this. It's sort of JSON-y. It shouldn't look too scary for people who are used to JavaScript. There's some influence there, but it is its own thing. So I talked about static site generators in general, but I want to talk about Gatsby specifically, why you want to use it, and it really comes down to the benefits of those other tools. So the biggest thing with the 1.0 release is optimized loads. Using GraphQL to only pull the data you want, and Webpack to only load the JavaScript you need for a specific page, it gets very optimized bundles for individual pages, so that you can load a site initially and load kind of the app frame and whatever the first page that you're going to is, and any data that it needs. But then as you go site to site, you load only the data that you don't have yet that is specific to that page. And that makes it fast. I don't know of any other static site generators that are set up to do things like that. So it has a rich plugin system so that you can get lots of things kind of for free. There are plugins for adding RSS feeds if it's a blog, plugins for adding offline support with service workers. And like I said, this is a pretty young tool with the 1.0, so there are plugins just churning out there right now. And finally, it's really flexible because it ends up, you're just building a React site, which can feel overkill for a static site, but in the end, it turns out to be very easy to update. So that was me talking about it. I do want to show some code now. Oh boy, that ends up really big. Let's see if I can fix that. Does that look okay to you guys? Does it need to be bigger or smaller? Good, okay. So this is my blog. It's not super exciting. I cannot move my mouse to the left side of the page. That's different. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to try to do this demo while only using half the screen, and we'll see how that goes. So it's a blog. It's got a bunch of text in it, but the cool thing here is that I can inspect and see. I have no idea. I can use the React Dev tools to see that everything in here is actually just components. So this recommended post section here is just a component that I can not get to. It's really not going to let me do this, is it? Okay. All right, we'll see how much I can do with keyboard here. So the recommended posts section there is just a React component that goes through. It gets past the different pages that I have and gets past a post, and I can just write JavaScript to come down and say, hey, I want to find the posts that were marked as read next for this particular post and display them with a link and a header down here. And I'm dashing through this, but this is just JavaScript here, filtering it down. And once it gets up on the site and the JavaScript is loaded, the JavaScript runs on the client, and it works like any other React site. But that same JavaScript runs on the server, and if I wanted, I could choose to not actually load JavaScript onto the client at all. And that logic, which could run on the client, could just decide on the server which posts are the recommended posts, and I could just be serving this as HTML. This component here is a template for the whole post, for what a post does, and it has some meta information here, but in the end it mostly just shows title, shows a footer, and it shows the article body inside. But this is where the GraphQL side comes in. So along with this component, I've included a query which tells Gatsby exactly what data the component needs. And in this case, I actually asked for quite a bit of data. I need the title, I need category of the post, I need the date of the post, I need the URL path, I want the read next to get the related posts, and then this is something that is a little ugly and that I need to fix. I'm currently pulling in a little bit of information about all of the posts. I want to fix that, but I have not figured out exactly how yet. Actually, I have figured out how, but I haven't done it yet. So I'm currently pulling in all of the posts with just enough information to show them down in that related section. So I've just got title, URL. I've got this don't feature thing here, which I would like to point out. So I have one post on my blog that I wrote as kind of a rant, and it was sort of negative towards an open source project. And I wrote it, it felt good, and then I felt bad about it afterwards. At the same time, I don't like pulling things down that I've put out there. So what I did was I added, there are a few places where posts can get recommended in my blog. In the related section, if a post hasn't actually specified which related posts it are. And in the popular section, and at one point that post actually was popular because it turned out writing negative, mean things on the internet gets hits. I just I point this out because it's a nice feature of the flexibility of Gatsby. What I did was I added this. So this is what my posts actually look like in my editor. There we've got a bunch of metadata at the top, and then it's just marked down below. So I set it so that if I did this, that was just a thing that got passed along, and then I would filter that out of any recommendation areas, so that even if tons of people went to see it, it wouldn't show up as being popular or anything. So it's embarrassing, but it's a nice demonstration of the types of flexibility that you get with a system like this. Because it's just code, even though it's generating flat HTML, I don't have to go and update every single piece of HTML. I generate it once, and then I can just configure it on a post-by-post basis. I'm considering doing a similar thing and adding a deprecation note for old posts I've written that I don't actually think are true anymore because new versions of stuff came along or whatever. So the only other thing I'd want to show here is, so I showed the components which are running on the client side and which are getting built with the HTML. But Gatsby also has a node process in the background that is actually controlling the build process. And it is set up as basically a series of hooks that you can hook into. So I'm using 3 of them here on post build. So after a build has completed, I do some work to generate an RSS feed and a sitemap. If you're doing this new, you don't have to do this. There are plugins now, but I wrote this blog back before 1.0 came out and the plugin system came out, and I did it in a specific way, and the plugin system isn't quite that way, so I'll probably convert to them at some point, but it hasn't happened yet. Then I just make a small modification to my Webpack config. Don't look at that because it's kind of hacky. Then when a node is created, I do some logic to see what its URL should be. And actually, in the thing I said I was going to do about not loading all the pages, I need to add some extra information here, so I don't need to do that. And then I go through and create all of the page objects. And that is also using GraphQL here to get all of the markdown files and get the information I need from them to tell them where the pages should be. How am I doing on time, Tracy? I'm out of time. Okay. Okay. I'm going to pull this over here. So closing up then, I sold Gatsby a little bit there. There are some downsides. Biggest thing is it's a young project. Second thing is that it relies heavily on all of these other technologies. So if you aren't into React, Webpack, GraphQL, you're going to need to learn quite a bit of stuff. I'd say Webpack is mostly abstracted away. You don't necessarily need to know a lot about Webpack, but React and GraphQL are pretty in your face. I didn't know anything about GraphQL before switching to 1.0, and upgrading was a little bit rocky for me. So it's just expect to learn things as you're doing this and have some time. With the young project, it's existed in some form for 2 years. It's existed in its current form for about a month. There is some good documentation and some missing documentation. It's getting better quickly, but the project as a whole is still changing quickly as people add plugins and documentation and bug fixes and stuff. So I've enjoyed having my blog on this. be a little bit more concerned about putting something production-y on it. There are production things on it definitely right now, but it's a little bit more early days still. Like, you get to fix the bugs when you see them. There's not like 100 Stack Overflow answers about how to get around the problem you're seeing. Is there a question?
How did you come across Gatsby?
Hmm?
How did you actually?
Oh, how did I come across Gatsby? Oh, that's a good question. I don't. The internet at some point. Maybe Twitter or Hacker News. I don't know, something. But I was looking to make my blog cheaper a year ago, so I was looking at static site generators, and I found it at that point. It has been taking off lately. It's gone from like really one guy kind of shepherded it to 1.0, but there have been a ton of people contributing recently. It's very easy to contribute to. I've put in a few fixes over the last few weeks, so if you're interested in getting in on a big React project and learning, I think that's a pretty good opportunity for that too. So that's just where to find stuff, and I'll post these slides on the meetup page later. And I guess I don't have time for questions, so you can grab me afterwards. I'll stick around for a few minutes.